Did you ever wonder what secrets lie beneath the surface of Japan's rich history? Well, let's take a journey back in time to understand the fascinating story of Japan's seclusion from the world. From the early 17th until the mid-19th century, Japan was a mystery to the outside world. The shoguns, Japan's military leaders who held power in the emperor's name, had declared the island nation a recluse. They made sure that the outside world was kept at bay, allowing foreigners only on a tiny island near Nagasaki. The rule was so strict that no Japanese were permitted to leave the country, ever. This self-imposed isolation, however, was not meant to last forever. The year was 1853, and a certain American naval officer named Matthew C. Perry had other plans. He took it upon himself to force open the doors of Japan to the world, initiating an era of international trade for the isolated nation. The sight that greeted Perry's fleet when they set foot on Japanese soil was nothing short of astounding. Japan, it seemed, was a country frozen in time, its culture and advancement suspended since the early 1600s. The buildings, the clothing, the weaponry, everything was reminiscent of a world 2 centuries behind the Western world. It was like stepping into a time capsule that had been sealed off and forgotten for over 200 years. This was the Japan of the past, a nation that had chosen seclusion over global interaction, tradition over modernization. But with the introduction of international trade, it was on the brink of a transformation that would forever alter its course in history. The opening of Japan to international trade marked a significant shift in the nation's history. It was the end of an era of isolation and the beginning of a new chapter, one that would see Japan rise from the ashes of its past and navigate through the currents of change to become the nation we know today. While Japan was making strides, China was under the control of European countries. Their sovereignty compromised, the Chinese found themselves consigned to a series of agreements, now known by historians as the Unequal Treaties. These treaties were far from fair, favoring foreign interests and leaving the Chinese at a disadvantage. Imagine, if you will, a world where parts of your country are under the control of external forces. These so-called concessions were areas where European or American law reigned supreme, even superseding the laws of the land. Think about the implications. Crimes committed against Chinese citizens by foreigners went unpunished according to Chinese law. Now, let's talk economics. The unequal treaties allowed foreigners to enjoy favorable trade conditions, reaping immense profits while the Chinese majority suffered. It's no surprise that this situation was less than ideal for the Chinese people, creating a hotbed of resentment and discontent. Meanwhile, across the waters, the Japanese were watching. They saw the plight of China, the loss of sovereignty, the economic exploitation, and they made a vow. They would not allow their nation to suffer a similar fate. The Japanese were determined to prevent the fate of China from becoming their own. Japan set about playing a strategic game of international chess, pitting one nation against another and occasionally flexing their muscle with the threat of violent uprisings against the Western powers. They understood their limitations, but they also knew the power of negotiation and compromise. Their goals were twofold: to modernize their country at a breakneck pace and to safeguard their nation from the fate that had befallen China. This was a delicate balancing act, a dance between maintaining tradition and embracing modernity, between preserving sovereignty and engaging with global powers. The Japanese were determined. They were resolute. They were focused. China's fate would not be theirs. They would modernize. They would negotiate. They would fight if necessary. But they would not be subjugated. They would not be exploited. They would not be a pawn in someone else's game. The Japanese were determined to prevent the fate of China from becoming their own. And so the stage was set for the next chapter of this complex and intriguing story. As Japan modernized, China became a vast laboratory for the Japanese military. The transformation of Japan from an isolated island nation to a modernized powerhouse was not without its repercussions. One of the key elements of this rapid transformation was the economic exploitation of China. The Japanese, determined not to become a vassal state like China, exerted their control over the Chinese in a ruthless and calculated manner. This economic exploitation was not limited to trade and resources alone. China, under Japanese control, was turned into a massive testing ground for the Japanese military. The Chinese populace was subjected to the horrors of modern warfare, not just as victims, but also as subjects for the Japanese to learn from. In their quest for power and dominance, the Japanese military did not shy away from using chemical and biological weapons, turning China into a vast laboratory of human suffering. The war between Japan and China, which spanned from 1936 to 1945, resulted in catastrophic losses for the Chinese. Both military personnel and civilians were affected, with the death toll estimated to be somewhere between 10 and 20 million. This staggering number is a testament to the unspeakable horrors that the Chinese had to endure during this period. However, the exploitation was not just a faceless act of a nation against another. There were individuals who played pivotal roles in these atrocities, men who, under the guise of serving their country, committed heinous acts against humanity. One man in particular took advantage of the situation in China. This man was Shiro Ishii, a doctor by profession, who used his knowledge and skills not to heal, but to inflict pain and suffering. His story, and the atrocities he committed, will be the focus of our next segment. Stay tuned as we delve deeper into the darkness that was Japan's exploitation of China. Meet Shiro Ishii, a man whose fascination with infection led to unthinkable horrors. Born into a well-settled middle-class family in 1892, Ishii was a man of medicine. His journey into the world of health and healing began as he stepped into adulthood, pursuing a career in medicine. But what started as a noble path quickly veered into the shadows. Ishii's interest in the medical field was not driven by a desire to heal, but by a peculiar fascination with the process of infection. The intricate dance of microbes invading a body, the relentless battle between the host and the invader captivated him. It was a fascination that would lead him down a dark and twisted path, far from the Hippocratic oath he had once sworn. In 1921, Ishii joined the Japanese army, donning the mantle of a military surgeon. It was here that his curiosity about infection began to morph into something far more sinister. His fascination with bacteria and viruses wasn't about finding cures or developing vaccines. Instead, it was about harnessing these invisible enemies for a darker purpose. His transformative journey began with a trip to the battlefields of World War I Europe. The horrors he witnessed there didn't move him to seek ways to prevent such atrocities. On the contrary, they sparked an interest in the possibilities of chemical and biological weapons. The idea of wielding such power, of controlling life and death on such a massive scale, was intoxicating to him. Ishii saw the potential in these invisible killers, the power they wielded to bring nations to their knees. He began to dream of harnessing this power, of turning these microscopic agents of death into weapons of war. This fixation would ultimately lead him to become one of the most infamous figures in the annals of war crimes. Ishii's interests were about to take a dark turn. His fascination with infection and chemical warfare would soon evolve into a monstrous obsession, leading to the creation of one of the most notorious and horrifying chapters in human history. The stage was set for the birth of Unit 731. From the depths of a dark mind, Unit 731 was born. Shiro Ishii, fascinated by infection and intrigued by the potential of chemical and biological weapons, decided to translate his interests into an unsettling reality. With his military background and medical knowledge, he was perfectly positioned to spearhead this ominous venture. In the early 1930s, Ishii began advocating for the creation of a biological and chemical warfare research unit. He saw an opportunity in the ongoing Sino-Japanese War, viewing the conflict as a vast, open laboratory. His idea, as grotesque as it was, gained traction within the Japanese military, who were keen to gain any advantage they could in their dealings with China and the West. By the mid-1930s, Ishii's vision took form as Unit 731, established under the guise of the Epidemic Prevention and Water Purification Department of the Kwantung Army. The unit was stationed in Harbin, China, far from the prying eyes of the international community, and even most of Japan's military and government. With Ishii at the helm, Unit 731 embarked on a series of inhumane experiments, all carried out in the name of research. The unit's victims, referred to chillingly as logs, were subjected to vivisections, forced infections, and exposure to deadly pathogens, all without the use of anesthesia. Their suffering was immense, their deaths inevitable. The impact of Unit 731 extended far beyond its immediate victims. It represented a dark chapter in human history, an instance where the pursuit of knowledge and power was perverted into a tool of unimaginable cruelty. The unit's activities remained largely hidden until after World War II, when the full extent of its atrocities started to emerge. The story of Unit 731 serves as a chilling reminder of the depths humanity can sink to. The establishment of Unit 731 was a consequence of one man's perverse curiosity, a military's willingness to exploit it, and a world's failure to prevent it. As we delve into the past, we must remember these horrors, not to dwell on the darkness but to ensure we never repeat it.